Hello, and welcome to Partially Redacted, a podcast where we discuss data privacy engineering and related topics. I'm your host, Sean Faulkner, and today I'm joined by the Chief Privacy Officer of Skyflow, Robin Andruss, and we'll be discussing what every company should know about data privacy. Robin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sean. I'm really excited to be here chatting with you more about data privacy.
Awesome. Would you mind starting off by just introducing yourself to our listeners out there?
Sure. I'm Robin Andruss. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer at Skyflow. I've been here about 6 months. And before I was at Skyflow, I have about 14 years of privacy, including most recently a role at Twilio as their data protection officer, but also privacy roles at Google, Yahoo, and TrustArc, a privacy consulting company. My career experience before that was really in the risk and compliance space at Deloitte and in-house at an investment firm doing finance and accounting. On a personal level, I'm a mom of 2 kids, a little boy and a little girl. And then I also have a very lovely 12-year-old yellow Labrador retriever as well.
Awesome. Sounds like a very full house.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you're the Chief Privacy Officer at Skyflow. And, what are essentially the responsibilities of someone who's filling that role at a company?
Yeah, so the Chief Privacy Officer is a relatively newer position that companies really are starting to realize that they do need someone dedicated to privacy. One of the very first Chief Privacy Officers actually was at a company I worked for at Yahoo, and Toth, who's now at Alexa in privacy. But, that was a company that was doing a lot of data processing through advertising and policies, and they really felt that privacy was important. So back then, in the 90s or 2000s, they were one of the first chief privacy officers, as well as some other advertising companies in the Valley. So we're starting to see the role evolve. But, it really is, showing that they are taking a serious approach towards privacy. Like, privacy is not just this back office thing where they're going to have someone kind of do a check the box, that it's really, something they're committing to, a tone from the top around privacy. So I kind of using that as a starting point. The role of a chief privacy officer really is to, first and foremost, be the privacy expert within the company, understanding the privacy rules and regulations, being able to interpret them and help support the business in implementing compliance with various rules and regulations, best practices, a lot around trust and ethics, like also thinking about what you can do with the data, but what do you want to do with the data, which is the best thing for your customers. And they can vary. Some chief privacy officers are doing a lot more of kind of thought leadership and the culture, and some are helping with the product. It's not like a CFO where, kind of a CFO always does the same role. It's still an evolving role in a way, but it really is kind of a head of privacy within the company.
Mm-hmm. And has there been a shift that's happened in our industry that's led to more companies, seeing the value of creating a chief privacy officer role within their overall organization?
Well, with the GDPR was really the forcing function of companies being more aware of this privacy thing and what it is and how important it is. So I would say that was, the first kind of forcing shift globally. That doesn't necessarily mean that every company went out and created a chief privacy officer. Within the GDPR, there is a regulation to have a data protection officer, which is, also someone who's responsible for privacy within the organization. But kind of coming back to the US, the CCPA, the GDPR, and just the overall awareness of how important privacy is and how much that awareness has grown over the past 4 and 5 years has really made, everyone from the C-suite to the board level realize that privacy is something important, just like security, that needs, its own dedicated role. And that is, something they want a leader to show that they're really dedicated to privacy. So you are starting to see more and more companies hire a chief privacy officer and making it an executive position.
Mm-hmm. And you've been working in the data privacy space for a long time for a number of different well-known companies. What led to this interest in working within data privacy?
Yeah. So to be honest to you, I really just fell into the space. My undergrad is in accounting. I was an auditor. I worked a lot on Sarbanes-Oxley and controls while I was auditing large companies at Deloitte. And then I went in-house and I was in corporate finance, basically, doing financial planning administration. And I really wasn't happy in that role. And I left that role and realized I really enjoyed working with clients and customers, and more or less fell into privacy at Trustee, which was the company with the little green seal that used to be on every page, showing that everyone had the same privacy standards. And so it wasn't there wasn't a particular event or something that happened that led me to privacy. It was more or less the job sounded interesting. I felt that it aligned with my background of working in risk and compliance and audit. And, the funny thing is I actually had to Google privacy when I was researching the role, and there wasn't much information out there. The only thing that was out there was information about a Facebook beacon settlement, which is where someone saw a guy was going to buy an engagement ring for his girlfriend at the time. And then he was looking at it online, and then the girlfriend saw it suggested to her. And that was, like a lawsuit that was actually settled because Facebook didn't believe that, he was given enough notice and choice that, like, by shopping for this ring, then his girlfriend would see what he was shopping for. So kind of the creepiness factor there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, I mean, honestly, it's really something I fell into. And really, once you get into the space, most people tend to like it. You feel that you're helping the general person, the general public. And so I find that most people that move into privacy, however they fall into it or directly move into it because it's a particular interest, they tend to enjoy it and are passionate about it.
You mentioned that, you came at this through having a degree in accounting and then kind of fell into it. What is usually is there like a typical background of someone who ends up kind of working as a privacy engineer or as, a compliance person?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I think, I've been now between San Francisco and Silicon Valley for a good number of years. And you see people, not doing what their originally degree was and kind of moving into something else like, like marketing or sales or different functions. So many of the early people in privacy were like that. They were kind of just maybe in a risk and compliance function, maybe in a policy function. There were some people that came at it from working for the big four consulting firms, because a lot of those firms had early on privacy, security, and risk consulting firms, and that's consulting practices, and that's where they kind of got their chops in privacy. That's where a lot of the earlier people kind of fell into privacy. They were the people who said, let me do this thing that's not that exciting, and then just really learned it and dove in. Now I am starting to see more people with, security backgrounds, definitely legal backgrounds. Still seeing a good amount of people coming from a risk and compliance and privacy consulting backgrounds, or engineers by trade that have particular interest in privacy or have dabbled in it and would like to really more get involved in the space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you mentioned, some people coming from security that, end up going into privacy. And it seems like a lot of times people who are maybe less familiar with, the space of privacy, they tend to lump security and privacy together. From your perspective and experience, what's the difference between those two areas?
So let's go back to like the early 2000s. Remember there were a lot of data breaches, a lot of information was being put online, and there were a lot of data breaches. And that's because the systems that held that data were not secure. So that is really security. Security is the lock and key and the techniques around keeping the data locked. Privacy more so is, there's a component of like your data can't be privacy without proper security controls, so the bad person can't get in and get the data. But it's also around like what you collect, why you collect it. For example, there's this concept of data minimization, which is, don't collect more than you need to provide the service for the customer. what you collect, why, what are you going to do with it? And then like obviously being truthful, disclosing why, how it's being used, the option of choice and consent. And so privacy really is much more about the how, the why the data is used. And security is around like the lock and key around keeping that data secure. So if you think of it as a Venn diagram, security is the controls and all the frameworks and the processes and the technologies to keep that data secure. And privacy is more around, collecting the data, what you're doing with the data. And we are also starting to see more merging of the two, if you will, through different technologies. So they're still in a way like very distinct studies, but you are starting to see more kind of similarities in between the two functions.
Yeah. So they're like different things, but heavily related in some fashion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you mentioned that when you were first looking at your first role in privacy, you actually had to Google around for, privacy. And in my past, before I worked at Google, I basically had no exposure to a privacy function throughout my career, as I had mostly worked for, smaller companies. And when I started leading product features at Google, people initially would ask me, did privacy sign off on this yet? And I was like, I don't know, is that a thing? And over time, I've learned, what they did, what the responsibilities are, and what mine were as well from a privacy standpoint. But can you explain what a privacy function is doing and what they're responsible for within an organization when it comes to things like product feature launches or the types of engineering that's going on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and no, that's a really good example. I mean, even if you apply that, what security is, about having a secure, like to the just general public, what security is, and having a secure password when you log into a website so no one can go in and get your data. But not everyone knows what privacy is. And I'll give you an example. Like my mother, she always, I think for years, thought I was in that security thing. And she's like, oh, that other, like your cousin's husband works in security. You should go to church. I'm like, no, Mom, it's privacy. And now after, some Cambridge Analytica and more just general awareness around privacy issues, I think people are really starting to understand it's different. So that's more for the general public, like my mom, who's a retired teacher. Going back to the corporate world, I want to use that analogy as well. Like you're building a startup, like you're not going to skimp on security, right? Like you don't want someone to hack into your system, hopefully. And that's kind of, I would say privacy is just, lagging a security function by a couple of years. So a company like Google, Facebook, Yahoo, Amazon, Walmart, especially those in the advertising tech industry or the healthcare industry, financial services industry, they do have larger established privacy programs because they had to be aware of privacy. They had consent decrees or different regulations. Like they really had to build up comprehensive privacy programs. Smaller organizations just haven't had the awareness or the resources, but I do see that starting to change.
Do you think that it makes sense for essentially every company to hire a privacy specialist?
Yeah, in an ideal world, I think that it would be excellent for every company to have a privacy function, someone who understands privacy that's able to help ensure the organization is compliant, is doing the right thing with data, and is obviously following all the rules, but also from an ethics and trust perspective. Mm-hmm. In reality, though, that might not be an option for companies with their budgets. As a best practice, I always recommend that if you're the CEO, if you're a board level, like be aware of privacy and what it is and why it is important to your organization. One privacy incident can put you in a lot of hot water, both from an overall risk perspective, potential investigation from the regulators and just trust too. But, so getting that tone from the top, at least understanding privacy is important, putting it into your budget. And let's say hypothetically, you don't have a resource to hire a chief privacy officer or don't have a resource to dedicate someone directly to privacy. What I have seen is, usually there's someone who kind of thinks it's interesting and is willing to put their hand up and take it on as Google, they had this thing called 20% projects. That's it's a little bit more than your day job. if your day job's 100%, that's 20%. So even if, you can't hire a full-time privacy specialist or privacy engineer, that's obviously a best practice. But if you can't, think about, maybe there's someone who wants to put their hand up and own privacy until you can actually bring that full-time person on.
And for organizations that do start investing in, maybe something like privacy engineering, where does it typically sit within an organization? Is that reporting to like an engineering function or some other area of the organization, or does it vary?
Yeah, so we're starting, the whole privacy space is relatively, young overall. And the privacy engineering space is very young as well. I've seen privacy functions, like more risk and compliance functions, might sit within like an internal audit or an audit department. I've seen a privacy function, like a privacy GRC or kind of privacy technical program managers sit within security. Some of the larger companies that have more established privacy engineering departments, like Google and Facebook, they will sit more within the product organization, or, for example, within kind of the privacy office, like the head privacy function. And, I have seen it in a legal department at one point, or in a lot of financial services company, you might see part of a risk department. So it's not set in stone. I think it's still evolving, and I think it depends on the need of the company, budget, the organization, etc.
And I imagine, given the variety of ways that the reporting structure might work within an organization, the sort of background and roles and responsibilities of privacy engineering also changes between organizations.
Yeah, I would say the definition of what a privacy engineer is also still really being formed in a way. If you think about it, you have the rules and regulations and they're interpreted, but then, an engineer doesn't always understand what these rules and regulations mean to kind of put it into how they need to put it into practice. And so the privacy engineer is that person who can be the layer between the rules and the regulations, understanding what they are, understanding the concepts, the whys, the hows, but also, technically savvy enough to sit down with an engineer and, map out, oh, hey, how would that DSAR deletion work? How would you, identify all the PII and label it as sensitive PHI or data and then put it into a vault and encrypt it? Like someone that, gets both sides of the scale. There's that, but then I've also seen much more technical sort of privacy engineers that are more in a data scientist role. So, they're working actually on differential privacy and data anonymization and statistics around that data. So, we're starting to see the role really evolve and be defined in front of our, as we speak right now.
Hey there, Sean here. I hope you're enjoying this episode of Partially Redacted. If so, please subscribe so you can always check out the latest episode and help others find the show by leaving a rating and review. Final thing before I get you back to the interview. If you're interested in privacy and security, have a challenge or issue you want to discuss, or want to share your expertise, please join the Partially Redacted community at skyflow.com/community. All right, now back to the show. Nice. And shifting to more sort of practical advice for a company, let's say that if you were advising like a startup today, what advice would you give them about how to navigate this like changing privacy landscape?
Yes. I would definitely say, at the minimum, like I said before, dedicate someone to it. It's if you're a CEO, it's going to be hard to also stay on top of the rapidly changing privacy regulations. Secondly, I would be aware of, there's a lot of different frameworks and tools out there now, which is really helpful for someone trying to kind of start a privacy function within an organization. The industry actually is very willing to kind of help out each other and, tools and tricks and best practices. But, think about what regulations are you in, what jurisdictions are you in, what regulations are you covered by? Is it HIPAA or health data you're collecting? Is it financial services data? Are you in the EU? Are you in the US? So at least first kind of understand the scope, and then, think about how to execute on a project or program to build out a comprehensive privacy program. hopefully you've been able to dedicate someone to really focus on it. But and there's also the ethics piece, which like you could collect certain sets of data, but do you want to? And don't just think about what you can do, but also think about, what's the right thing to do for your end user and your customer.
Right. Yeah. So for someone who, a company that decides, someone puts their hand up, I guess, to take on this responsibility, but maybe has not worked in the space before, and they need to kind of get up to speed with, the regulations that maybe are applicable to them. How do they even start that process? Like, what kind of resources should they seek out?
Yeah. So I always point people to the IAPP.org. It's kind of the established privacy industry association. It is a nonprofit, and they used to have free publications that you could subscribe to that just curated all the privacy news. There's one for the US, one's for EU, one for Canada, one for APAC. Those used to be free. I don't know if they still are, but I know there's some content on their website that is free. Another industry association I found helpful is the Future Privacy Forum, which is more of a think tank in privacy for the US. But they have some interesting analysis of different privacy rules and regulations. The great thing is I'm starting to see some classes on LinkedIn, like just the basics of privacy and the GDPR. And that's great because that wasn't even around in 2018 when I was working with engineers and trying to explain privacy to them. I couldn't just say, here, go read this LinkedIn course. It wasn't there. Mm-hmm. As you know, there's some new privacy engineering classes that are coming out. That you could take. And then we are starting to see some universities, like Carnegie Mellon, has a privacy engineering certificate and a master's program. I did take the certificate program, and we know some people taking the master's program. And I've actually been, it's very nice to be able to work with someone who kind of gets the privacy basics, learned through through an organization. It just makes kind of everyone's job easier to understand the why. Like, why is a cookie consent like this? Like, kind of the how and the why behind. So the IAPP, the Future Privacy Forum, look at some free classes. There are a lot of resources out there now, but those are kind of the more well-known established industry resources. Yeah,
those are great. We should probably add those into the show notes for this episode. And I should probably go take the certificate at Carnegie Mellon in privacy. But in terms of, companies that are starting out, what are the things that every company should be thinking about when it comes to data privacy?
If you haven't even thought about it, the very minimum is understand what data you're collecting and why. Do a data mapping, understand what data you're collecting, why, how it's being stored, if your disclosures are accurate. Just that's the bare minimum. And then, moving forward from that, understanding the different rules and regulations that are coming, how it's going to impact you, and building a comprehensive program around privacy, just like you would a security program. That's the bare minimum. But then there's also, other options around. There's different risk framework, like the NIST has a privacy risk framework. There's other, industry privacy frameworks and best practices that you could use to kind of mature your program. So it really depends on the level of maturity you'd like to have your program at.
And then for companies that, they basically choose to not prioritize this because of, other things that are more important to them at the time, like, building features that serve their customers or, focusing on revenue generation or something like that. What are some of the consequences or impact or potential consequences or impact for not, prioritizing something like privacy earlier on and creating a privacy program?
Yeah, leading with privacy can be very advantageous, but you need to be truthful about what you're doing and do what you say what you do. So I'll use, an example of an app that was recently touted as a privacy safe app. A lot of people downloaded it, and then they found out that, the app wasn't, at the time they downloaded it, wasn't exactly doing what they said they were doing in the privacy policy. They have since updated it. But, if you are, just want to add the caveat that if you are going to kind of make a pitch about being privacy safe and forward, to really think about your policies and programs and actually doing what you say you do. The worst case scenario is, obviously you are not following a law or regulation. What what could happen is, you have a privacy incident where I'll use, just Facebook as an example. This was a while ago, but, at one point Facebook decided that everyone's messages and in your posts should all be public to just everyone, to all your connections. And I knew of this change coming because I was in the privacy industry in 2012, and not many people did. So I went in, I changed my settings to, only my connections could see my Facebook posts, not just the whole world. And not everyone did that. And what happened was a researcher actually discovered this, and then came an investigation, and the FTC went after Facebook. The worst case scenario is obviously you could say something, you're not following through with it. You could have an investigation, you could be fined, you could lose your customers, negative PR, not following the rules and regulations. And then that could take down your whole brand, hypothetically.
In the case of, the Facebook situation, maybe you don't know, but like, how does something like that get through an organization like Facebook? I'm assuming they would have had a privacy program at that point.
I can't comment on that time at Facebook. I think it was kind of a different era in a way. It was, we're talking 10 years ago. Social was really big, right? Everyone had a social media site or wanted to have a social media site. And it could just have been the culture. And maybe just, thinking that this was the best thing for everyone. Mm-hmm. And so, just sometimes a culture might clash. I mean, I remember seeing a news article around the same time where I think it was a teacher had posted on Facebook negative things about her students. And she had thought it was just to her private kind of Facebook community. And then that change happened and all these things were said to a broader network. And then I think she lost her job because of it. But she thought when she initially posted these things that it was private to just her contacts, like an email, right? Like you don't expect the contents of your email to be shown with everyone. And that was her expectation. But, if you look at, going back to 2012, like I think I remember, privacy is dead, everything's shared, like everyone wanted to share things. And so maybe there were discussions around it at the time internally, maybe there were not, but a lot of it is just the culture and the company at the time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Facebook and other social networks were really taking off when I was in graduate school. And I remember sort of that sentiment of, everything's the public, privacy's dead. And there has been really a shift over the last decade or so to I think, of the new generation, and also essentially consumers and businesses understanding that maybe that's not the best thing.
Yep. I mean, I've recently read something that, the newer generation, more of the people in crypto, like they kind of want to be kept anonymous. They're over this, like being so, your life revolving around your social, like Instagram image. So there could be a shift in going back to like, more private, more I don't want to share with everyone. I want to share with some people and, share my life with some people on Instagram or Facebook, and others I don't need to share with the world. And then there are people that want to share with the world and want to get everything out there, and that they love doing that. And that's okay too. I think the point is, people do want to use these products and platforms, and giving them the choice, notice, and disclosure is important.
Yes, well said. In terms of, we talked about this shift that's happened over the last decade, but looking forward to, maybe the next decade and beyond, are there future technologies or developments happening in the privacy space that you're excited about?
Yes, for sure. So the more recent regulations, the GDPR, the CCPA, as they were put in place, a lot of companies were really just scrambling to put those in place to make sure they were really understanding their data flows, their data mapping, performing risk assessments around the data, as like understanding how it was really impacting the data subject or the person. And a lot of these are, in a way, risk exercises like a manual, checklists, and documentation. But what is really nice, and I'm starting to see, is much more technologies around privacy enhancing technologies, or PETs as they're called. So, rather than just having a database with the PII sprawled everywhere, is, like maybe you just want to put certain sets of data that are highly sensitive into a more secure vault, and then share a token or something less sensitive or identifiable outside of the vault. So you're starting to see and really more technologies and technologists getting involved in solving the privacy program. That's what I'm excited about. And then, I'm also just excited that people are becoming more aware of privacy and passionate about it and understand how it impacts them. Because I do think just that general awareness is good for public and people, to keep themselves safe and their families safe.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's a really exciting time in terms of some of the development that's going on in privacy. And I'm sure that's only going to continue to expand especially with things like the scale of cloud really allows us to do things that we couldn't really do 20 years ago in terms of, computational cycles and being able to do things across, multiple computers and stuff. Of course, that introduces new privacy challenges that we have to deal with, but there's that kind of power, computational power allows us to do some amazing things when it comes to actually keeping people's information secure, and as well as other programs like, differential privacy and beyond.
Yep. And, that's exactly it is, how can you still have access to the data so the data scientists or the analytics team can still run a business, but, keep that user's data protected and safe. So
in terms of, if someone's listening to this and, they want to get or they want to learn more essentially about data privacy, you mentioned some resources earlier in terms of a company, but for someone who's kind of curious, maybe they want to get into the privacy engineering space as a career path, where should they go to start to explore that?
That's a good question. I mean, I have talked to some people around getting into the space. Some people on LinkedIn are, willing to just kind of talk to people about tips and tricks on how to get in the space. I think, if you're an educational person, like going to a postgraduate program or something could help. And another option is there are actually a lot of temp agencies that might hire privacy people. But the problem is like the chicken and egg scenario. They want the person that's usually hiring the person through a temp agency wants someone with privacy experience. But think about, what your transferable skills are, right? So some of privacy might be understanding, like you're a product manager. And so, understanding the flow of a DSAR process, like data subject access request process, and showing it actually happens. Let's say you have a risk and compliance background, like doing a Sarbanes-Oxley or IT audit, looking at different controls or being a security controls or GRC is kind of taking that and then doing that 20% project idea where you try to learn more about privacy and volunteer for more privacy within your organization, learn it that way, and then move into a full-time role regarding privacy.
Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned earlier, a lot of companies, especially in the early days, are looking for someone to kind of put their hand up and take on some of the challenges of data privacy. So there's probably opportunities like that if you're working in the industry today.
Yeah, I would say in general, like more privacy. If you need someone in privacy, people would like to have someone who has the privacy experience. Mm-hmm. There just aren't as many people out there that have kind of that, expertise of running privacy in-house. But if there's someone willing to learn, there are a lot of resources out there where you can learn privacy and run a program.
Awesome. And is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it's a great space. There's a lot of opportunity for people in the space. The people in the industry are generally very willing and helpful. And another idea I just thought of is there's also the IAPP puts on these conferences. So if you're really kind of curious about learning more about the privacy industry, doing some more learning, they have an upcoming conference in Austin, Texas in October around privacy, security, risk that I'll actually be at. But that's a good way to just kind of also just immerse yourself into the world to learn more about it as well.
Awesome. That sounds great. Thanks so much, Robin, for joining us today and, sharing your expertise and hopefully helping some companies out there start to kind of figure out where to begin and how to navigate the world of data privacy.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. Thanks for hosting me. It's a great chat.
Thank you.